It is my belief that we can use the power of food to make important change. If you look at food, there are three other big categories of food that you have to consider: climate change, unemployment, and revitalization. And those are probably combinations that you heretofore have not thought about. And if you read anything important this week, whether that was a magazine or whether that was a newspaper, you heard a lot about climate change. And hopefully you saw that piece that was concerned about food as well. But unfortunately, they forgot about unemployment, and they forgot about revitalization. I'd like to talk about those. We have an unemployment rate of 3.6%, but more than 1/3 of Americans who want work aren't working. So the measurement that we've been using to try and define how well we're doing, which is the unemployment rate, does not tell the whole story. To get that whole story, we have to look up a term called labor participation rate. And the labor participation rate says that in America, that number is 62.9%. So the 62.9% are those people with jobs. That also then means that 37% that are looking for work aren't working. If you were talking to an economist, that economist would say, we have structural weakness in our economy, which is a fancy word for saying the people are not where the jobs are. So, the scary part of it all is that even in this robust economy that we recognize is one of the best in decades, the labor participation rate actually dropped by 5%. What does this really mean? I've thrown some interesting stats at you. What this really means is that 95 million Americans are out of work. Think about it. We've been indifferent to industry. We've allowed major parts of our industry to be imported to other parts of the world, and we didn't care. We let it go. There were whole trades that we have allowed to be shipped overseas in towns like Rockford, Illinois, and others that used to be the heart of our machinist industry are now gone. Those trades that once built America are now building other countries that have now become our competitors. So what do we do about it? And how might this affect an industry that I believe that we all need to pay a lot of attention to, and that industry is food. Why food? Food is the #1 industry in the world for creating jobs. And I believe that we must create jobs. When I look at a city like Chicago, which is where I'm born and raised, I had the opportunity to watch whole factories and industries literally leave Chicago. And to this date, those industries or those lack of jobs have scarred that city. And what that means is that it creates a perfect environment for violence and dysfunction and drug abuse. So it's more than whether or not someone needs to use their hand, and it is my hope that we don't make these same mistakes with food, because here's how important food is. Food is $75 billion of our exports. Food is also the #1 employer in the world. It is also the #1 industry for warehousing and trucking. And it is also in America where we spend $1.6 trillion feeding ourselves. $825 billion of those dollars are the groceries that we take at home. But what's more important than anything else in this, to give you a sense of the magnitude, is that by the time Americans are 30 years old, 50% of us have somehow worked in the food industry. So food is too important to just eat. We need food to nourish our economies as well as nourishing our stomachs. So I would like to share some stories with you to give you a sense of the tenuousness of our current conditions. With some of those bad pieces of data that you had a chance to see about climate change and that you've had an opportunity to see about pollution and other things that came out this past week, how many of you are aware that 45% of our farmland is in close proximity to oceans? And that with sea level rise and a storm, you could render 45% of our food system globally to be too short of the ability to meet demand. So what that means is that literally there won't be enough food. These are serious conditions. And when you look then at how much food is dependent upon water, it's important to note that 70% of all the fresh water used in the world is for agriculture. But I didn't come here to completely depress you for the whole evening. I do have some good news. And the good news is that we can use some of these conditions to actually create jobs in some of our challenged communities around the country. The order of magnitude of some of these difficulties is so robust that I like to think of the term of all hands on deck. We may need all hands on deck to deal with issues like climate change. And better yet, a whole new industry that's being developed that's called climate response. Climate response, British researchers have decided, is already a $2.1 trillion industry. And it is my hope that we can take some of this industry and put it in some of the challenged communities around the country. But before you can think about, can you fix a challenged area, you have to do an inventory of what's available. There are two cities that we've taken a particular interest in. One is Wellston, Missouri, which is 12 minutes from downtown St. Louis. The other is Duquesne, Pennsylvania. Duquesne is 20 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh, and this particular site is the site of a former steel mill that employed over 10,000 people. If I share it with you some of the statistics of what's going on in those towns, if I consider Wellston is now down to 1,800 people. The median income for Wellston is $20,000 a year, and the median property value is $47,000. In Duquesne, Pennsylvania, the median income is $24,000, and the median property value is $47,000. So what can we possibly bring to those communities that can actually give them hope for some of the things that we should do in the future? And quite frankly, that hope is food. This slide is demonstrating a platform of, I call, rescue. It is 180,000 square feet of buildings that are dedicated to raising fish and producing vegetables. And like Mother Nature, it is constructed to waste not an input or an output. Everything is to be used. That is a large-scale aquaponics facility that's producing over 600,000 pounds of fish a year and many millions of pounds of produce. That, by the way, is all organic. And these facilities are all being located in food deserts. So it has an opportunity to not only to supply people not living in those communities, but also to give a hand up to all of those folks that are there, which is quite exciting. And if you look at it, what it creates is an opportunity for these communities to both be sustainable as well as to have both physical and other property improvements throughout its community. So when you look at what the neighbors will see, they will see new beautiful facilities like this, that when we place in the right location will require simply the opportunity to walk to work, not requiring cars. So we are directly impacting some of those communities, and that the minimum wage at these locations are actually $10,000 to $17,000 more than some of those statistics that I shared with you earlier. And at a minimum, 130 jobs, but on average, 200 jobs if no one else chose to join us. Other people, however, are choosing to join us. So there's a vermiculture operation, which is a fancy name for worms, eating all the produce that you guys didn't eat in restaurants. So the vermiculture operation brings another 50 people. And then there's a mushroom operation that would like the good soil that the worms created, and that'll bring another 50. And then, since I've mentioned that this is a catalyst, it has also attracted a data center that says we have excess heat that we'd like to have you somehow use. It is also then a school, a lunch manufacturer that is choosing to co-locate so they can have the freshest food available to feed to the kids. So my lasting message is, there is a lot of power in your fork. And that if you are directed with how you use your fork, we can make tremendous improvements in our society. And I'd like to have you consider local, like to have you consider production, and with those two considerations, we'll know when we've got somewhere when your food purveyor also happens to be your neighbor. Thank you.